Thanks, Barbara. And I'm just going to put this iPhone here to keep me honest with time, not because I'm texting while reading. Uh, so thanks for coming out and joining me. I've been writing about religion and politics for I guess well over a decade now. But I think the reason that I'm here and what maybe brings a lot of you out is sex, and particularly the really unpleasant sex of John Ensign, Mark Sanford, and Chip Pickering, all of whom sort of very publicly detonated their marriages last year. It's worth remembering that these weren't necessarily backbenchers. Senator Ensign at the time was making trips to Iowa. Mark Sanford, I think, was a genuinely kind of bright presidential prospect before he redefined the Appalachian Trail as a path to Argentina. And then last and least in every way was Chip Pickering. Chip Pickering from Mississippi in some ways had a greater impact in American life than either of those two better-known men. Back when he was a Senate aide, actually, to Trent Lott, and in that capacity was one of the architects of the 1996 Telecommunications Act, a massive privatization of the airwaves, which led us to a number of media monopolies and a lot of really boring radio and terrible journalism. But he saw that as sort of unleashing the invisible hand, which the members of this organization have always confused. The invisible hand of the market, they assume, must be the invisible hand of God. And that's one of the ways in which they differ from traditional fundamentalism. They have more of an economic perspective. Now, Chip Pickering, if he's known at all, to most people, though, he's known as the congressman from Borat. If you saw Borat, Cultural Learnings of America for Make Benefit, Glorious Nation of Kazakhstan, Sacha Baron Cohen, playing the sort of idiot reporter Borat, makes his way to a revival meeting where Pickering takes to the pulpit to proclaim himself a loyalist of the gathering and its truths, creationism and religious nationalism, America the Christian. America as Christian, this idea that doesn't exist in the Constitution, this idea that Madison and the founders specifically rejected, America as a Christian nation was something all three of these guys either believed in or paid lip service to. But beyond the ideological ties between them, I was fascinated by this ties to this house on C Street, 133 C Street. And I encourage everybody, if you're in the neighborhood, it's across from the Library of Congress, stop in. They are tax exempt as a church, and the IRS has certain criteria about churches. Churches are supposed to be public. So some of the residents there, Senator Jim DeMint, Senator Tom Coburn, they would love to see you. They would love to worship with you. They would love to, oh, no, I'm sorry, I'm completely mistaken. They would not love to see you, and they would not love to worship with you, because the other thing that makes this organization distinct from the fundamentalists that a lot of us are familiar with, the pulpit pounders, the Bible thumpers, and also the quiet people who are just very, very devout and perhaps literal in their faith, but grow out of, and I always like to remind, especially liberal audiences, fundamentalism begins as a small d democratic tradition. This idea that no one's going to tell me how I'm going to worship God. I know the truth. I read it right here in the Bible. That's one kind of fundamentalism. Well, there's this other kind of fundamentalism that begins with this organization, with this idea of an elite, this idea that goes back to 1935. This was the oldest, arguably most influential Christian conservative organization in America. Begins with a revelation. One night in April 1935, the founder believes that God comes to him. He thought God spoke to him fairly regularly. And this time he had a new message, that Christianity had been getting it wrong for 2,000 years. Focusing on the poor, the suffering, the weak, the down and out. That was boring. God was calling him to a higher place, to be a missionary, to be a servant for the up and out, as he called them, the top men, the key men. Now, it wasn't that he didn't care about the poor, but he thought that God was telling him that the best way to help the weak is to help the strong. Then they can dispense blessings to the rest of us. It's sort of a trickle-down religion. You saw that at play in the case of Senator Ensign, Governor Sanford, and Chip Pickering, all of whom had these affairs, all of which were covered up in part by this organization. In fact, the Senator Ensign affair is now the subject of a Justice Department investigation. It was instructive because the cuckold in the case, Senator Ensign's best friend, and also a member of this organization, at first when he spoke out about it, he said, The men of C Street are great men. They're doing God's work, and I know they're going to help my small f family through this. Well, as time went on, that didn't turn out to be the case, and so he came out and he said, actually, I was wrong. It's about protecting John Ensign. It's about protecting C Street. It's about protecting power. They threw the weaker brother under the bus. The best way to help the weak, remember, is to help the strong. Senator Ensign is a senator, so they stuck with him. Mark Sanford did not live at C Street, but was a regular visitor and turned to C Street to help him with his troubled marriage. He sent his wife, Jenny Sanford. Her book is probably here in the store. It's a fascinating document. He sent her to C Street to have the men kind of straighten her out when they're having trouble in their marriage. Maybe some of you do this. Maybe men, you are having trouble in your marriage, and so you recruit another group of men that your wife doesn't know to explain to her her wifely duties. That's how it worked for Jenny. They explained to her that she should never express anger toward her husband, that was something reserved for men. Men could have those serious discussions. And you'll forgive me for being vulgar, but that she should never withhold sex from him, because as one of God's chosen leaders, as a man anointed by God to develop this leadership led by God, well, he had needs. He must be satisfied. It's that gross. And Chip Pickering, last and least, he actually just met his mistress in the C Street house, registered as a church. She's a telecom heiress. He quit Congress to become a telecom lobbyist, so it's sort of, a telecom romance. That's sort of the seedy side of this story, and maybe that's why I get to be here and talk with you today, because I had written this other book about this called The Family, and when I published that, I was sort of going out there, and I wanted people to pay attention not to this kind of seediness, but to the international story, the way that they're involved in overseas. You take that same approach, this idea that some politicians are chosen for power, and now you project that abroad. Now you put some money and some muscle and some power behind that, and it becomes not just something kind of sleazy, but something dangerous. So I had gone into the archives. There's 592 boxes of documents stored at the Billy Graham Center Archive, and I moved out there to the Billy Graham Center Archive, out on the campus of Wheaton College, as an evangelical college. I happened to be Jewish, and I was at this evangelical college, and one day someone came up to me and asked if I had heard about Jesus. At the campus of an evangelical college, and I wanted to give that guy a gold star. He had found the Jew. So I lived in these documents. It was a different kind of immersion. I had lived with the organization, but now I lived in these documents and sort of unearthing the story, the theology. One of the stories I told was of their involvement in Somalia. And this is an important one because the documents are so blunt about this. They're so candid. I have to refer to, there's a recent New Yorker piece that also dealt with this and dealt with the Somalia story. The thing that the author, Peter Boyer, good journalist, he forgot to do, he forgot to look at the documents. He didn't go to the archive. It's hard to tell a story when you don't do the research. And when we look at the research, we found that this leader in Somalia, an unlikely prospect for Christian conversion, he described himself as a Quranic Marxist. He'd been a Soviet client, but the Soviets had dumped him. He needed a new friend, and he wanted America to be that friend. And he said, I will pray to Jesus, and here's what I want in return. I want my defense budget doubled. I want meetings with the White House. And I want a little kind of hands-off policy while I crack down on this rebel group in the north. Done, done, and done. He got it all. He sent the fellowship a list of military supplies he was going to need. He said he was going to fight Cubans in Somalia. He cracked down on the rebel group in the north, and then the one in the south, and then the one in the west, and then the one in the east, and the one in the center. He destroyed the country, and it's never recovered. That, to me, is a more important story than Senator Ensign. So I tried to lead with that story when the first book came out, and I would say, let's talk about Somalia. And I remember one radio producer saying, what's a Somalia? So I've learned. That's why we're starting with C Street. And it is important because you want to follow this kind of the silliness of this religion, but carry out the ideas. What are the consequences? Which is important because many people get involved in this movement with the best of intentions. They don't set out to create murder and genocide in Somalia. They want to help.